This is a WVUA 23 Sports Special.
And good evening, everybody. I'm WVUA 23 Sports Director Gary Harris. Welcome into this WVUA 23 Sports Special. I'm joined by the University of Alabama Director of Athletics, Greg Byrne. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Gary.
And this is just an opportune time for me to sit down with you because there's so much going on. And so I want to dive right in because I want to cover as much territory as we can. I want to start with the playoff. It went to 12 teams. When you were watching that ACC championship game play out, did you get a sense that night that the way that game played out, it was probably going to be bad for Alabama?
Yeah, I think all of us, everybody that's an Alabama fan, we were all, once Clemson started pulling ahead, we thought, okay, go Clemson, don't make it close. And then when it gets close in the second half, I'm like, oh, man, that's the one thing we didn't need to have happen. And obviously we had a couple really tough games that we recognized publicly, and we put it in other people's hands. And we did the year before and got in the four after we beat Georgia. And so, yeah, I was concerned about it. And I know that at some point what we have been talking about the entire time is the strength of the SEC. When you play an SEC schedule, the wear and tear that takes on your team through the year. And where I had said going into the year and throughout the year, let's look at how the committee values strength of schedule. Committee's got a tough job. I don't envy their position. I'm on the basketball committee. You have tough decisions to make. And so when the decision was made, what it was, and I get the thought process of why the debate was there, but I also thought we were one of the 12 best teams. And so I can't, and when we decided to put something out publicly, I probably should have clarified this better. I kind of assumed people would understand it, but you know what happens when you assume, right? And so basically, I can't control the SEC schedule. Okay, we're going to play the teams in the SEC every single year. Some years maybe a little more challenging than others. Next year's going to be challenging again. But what we can control is the out-conference schedule. And both Coach Saban and myself, and it's continued with Coach DeBoer, we've said we want to see good matchups. That's good for our program. It's good for our fans. It's good for college football. But when your strength of schedule is so far ahead of somebody that you're trying to decide, and I kept reading about 2 versus 3 losses, like, man, there's a difference in how you get to 2 versus 3 losses, and that should be recognized. And so when I said let's take a look, and we're going to have to look at it, I think we are going to have to look at it. Does that mean we're going to go cancel all of our home and homes? No, because but are we going to look at some of them? Yeah, we probably will. But I also know we have contracts, and so those aren't easy to break, and we want to make sure we do things the right way if there are opportunities to look at what we're doing from a scheduling standpoint.
Greg, regardless of why, and under Coach Saban, 8 out of the 10 years Alabama made the 14 playoff. You advance to a 12-team playoff, and you don't make it in this first year of a 12-team playoff. From a program perspective, how disappointing is that?
Well, it is disappointing. That's where we expect to be part of that. We expect to be part of the college football playoff, and Coach DeBoer expects that too. Our leadership for our university does. And we invest and support it in a manner to be able to do that. Do I think we will always make it every single year? No, at some point you won't. This year we didn't make it. Do we expect to be back there next year? Yeah, we do. And I also say is this Southeastern Conference has gotten even more difficult with the addition of Texas, with the addition of Oklahoma. And so we just have to, and obviously with all the instability, which I'm sure we'll talk about with the transfer portal, we got to look and say, okay, how do we put ourselves in the best position to have success and get to the postseason, get to the CFP, and that is our expectation, that's our standard, and that's not going to change.
Big picture, outside of just the Alabama perspective, for the SEC, I mean, there are four Power 4 conferences, but the Big Ten and the SEC are kind of linked as the two at the top. For them to get 4 teams in, for the SEC to only get 3, and for the ACC, which is generally regarded as a notch below the SEC, to get 2, is that a blow for the SEC? Is that a blow for Commissioner Sankey and the conference to not get as many teams in as the Big Ten did.
Well, we obviously feel we should, and to the Big Ten's credit, they've got a lot of good, deserving teams. The ACC is, and listen, we all have our strengths as conferences. We think a year in and year out, week in and week out, in the SEC is as challenging as you get in college football, and that should be recognized, and that's not a boastful statement. It just look at the national champions, look at the success we've had in the playoffs historically, all the way back to the BCS, and so I think it's something that you got to look at. You don't want to make long-term decisions off of 1 year of data. At the same time, too, I don't think there's anything wrong with sticking our chest out from time to time and saying, "Hey, this is a really challenging conference, and that needs to be recognized in how things are decided from a postseason standpoint."
And you've already alluded to this, Greg, but it didn't seem like in the end that strength of schedule carried as much weight as it should have with the committee. And you've already addressed that you may have to look at some of these non-conference series in that light.
Right. An 8-game conference schedule, if for some reason we end up going to 9, which I'll be curious to see if there's a lot of support for that. We haven't talked as ADs on that for a little while. But it's, yes, can't control the SEC schedule, but we can't control non-conference. And there's some really good matchups, Gary. Having Texas home and home before they were in the league was really good. We had a lot of fans up at Madison last year in Wisconsin. They're coming back this year. But we open up at Florida State. That's not going to change this coming year. And then they come back the year after. And with the transfer portal and the churn in the rosters, Florida State's going to look a lot different next year than they did this year. And so we're going to have to go in and play really well. It'll be a really important game for us to get the season off on the right start. I look at our game, I think it's a 28-29 with Ohio State. It's not that far away.
That's right.
And, the college football world will be buzzing that entire offseason talking about when that game happens. So I just, I don't want to see them go away, but I think this, at least in this 1 year data, made us say, okay, do we need to look at some of this, and we'll see how this evolves.
Speaking of scheduling, as you said, you've got no control of the SEC schedule, but there is some concern, I know, from an Alabama perspective, because I've talked to a couple staff members, and this goes back as long as I can remember with Alabama, with bye week situations. Of course, double byes again this year, and Alabama had 2 bye weeks ahead of big games, but Alabama faced 4 teams last year that had bye weeks and will again this year.
Yep.
Is there any way that can be looked at to make that more fair and equitable for all the teams, where it's just not Alabama that's facing teams coming off bye so often?
Yeah, so our 4 byes this year were LSU, Georgia, which we were fortunate to win both of those, and they both had byes those weeks too. Then our other 2 byes were the week of where Vanderbilt came off of a bye before they played us, in Oklahoma. Yeah. Interestingly, I think I've got this right. If I'm not purposely miscommunicating, I don't think Kalen DeBoer has ever lost in his coaching career coming off a bye.
Wow.
I
knew he was pretty good.
It gives you another week to prepare and all those things. And so both Vanderbilt and Oklahoma deserve credit for the games they played against us. I have brought that up. It doesn't fit in with the guidelines. The most you can have is 2 where you don't have them. We have that, unfortunately. Right. And one other school did last year, and I think another school does this year, but I don't think we should be singled out on that.
We're going to get into NIL, the portal full force, for sure. But right now, in this modern era, Alabama's a brand. I like to say, Alabama, they're the Yankees. They're the Cowboys. They're the Lakers. I mean, that's where Alabama
We're really
is at in
fortunate
college
for
football.
that, yes.
And in the past, that carried so much weight. But in the new landscape, are brands being diminished because of what, I say rules? I guess there are no rules. But where we're at with college football, we see Alabama with 14 or 15 players already in the portal. Other major brands doing the same thing. Does it diminish what you've built because of the desire for players to make money?
Well, Coach Saban always talked about one of the things he kept as his foundation was to have young men get an education, continue to grow and develop as a football player, but also create value for themselves for the future. And what we're seeing is some young men and young women. It's not alone in football, who are probably making shorter term decisions, thinking that that maybe there's an opportunity to make another $50, $100, maybe sometimes $500,000 somewhere else. And I get the real pressures that that puts on you to make decisions. At the same time, too, our track record of young men and young women staying at Alabama because of the investment we make in them, academically, nutrition, medically, strength and conditioning, personal development across the board, isn't matched anywhere else. We've had young men and young women transfer out of here, say, my gosh, I didn't realize how good I had it at Alabama. And we've had young men and young women transfer in here and say, man, it's really good here. And they're coming from very prominent programs. But the real and I can tell you from an NIL strategy, what we have tried to do is have it be more spread across the team to where you can have an entire team and not just invest in maybe one or two people on a respective roster. And I think that's healthy for the locker room. I think that's healthy to say, okay, I'm going to get some opportunities because of this, but I also realize I got to have teammates around me. I've got to have some balance in where that is. If anybody says they've got the formula figured out, I'd like to meet them. They probably have a bridge to sell me too. But at the same time too, I do want everybody to know we are hypersensitive about it, trying to understand how we evolve in this in this time of extreme evolution.
All right, we're going to take our first time out. When we come back with Greg Byrne, is television and men's basketball becoming television sports? Are we pricing the average fan out of coming to games? Also, what's going to happen with the bowl games? And in the current economic reality of college sports, will ADs like Greg Byrne be forced to consider dropping sports in the future? We'll discuss all those topics when we return to our special sports coverage with Greg Byrne on WVUA 23. And welcome back to our WVUA 23 Sports Special with Alabama Director of Athletics Greg Byrne. I'm Gary Harris. We're going to dive right back in. We're covering a lot of topics. All right, college football, men's basketball are big-time television sports. There's no doubt about that. But do you have a fear that they're going to become too much about television? I think of the holiday basketball tournaments. There might be 1,000 fans in the stands for some of these tournaments.
That's generous.
Yeah,
yes,
but it doesn't matter because they're on TV and they're generating the ratings. When you look at expenses now for coming to, let's say, an Alabama football game for the experience, tickets, parking, NIL donations, hotel expenses, gas for travel, food costs, do you worry about pricing average fans out of being able to come to
100%. In fact, Gary, we talk about it a lot, trying to be very considerate. It's going to, if you're going to sit on the 50-yard line in a chairback seat, that's going to be a different price than if you're sitting in the end zone. And I can tell you, we try to be very thoughtful when it comes to that, so where our fans understand that, hey, we realize, one of the great things about a Saturday at Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium is that you got people from all different backgrounds coming together. I will also tell you, it's been interesting. We've been studying the secondary market. There is a huge business because there is opportunities because of where our price points are on our tickets, and there's a lot of demand well above that we actually are leaving a lot of money on the table. And we're okay with that because we want people to be able to come to the games. We also know within our community there's a lot of businesses around that benefit off of us having full stadiums and full arenas and all those things. And a hotel room on a Tuesday in February is a very different price than a Friday in October, November. And so I think collectively, it's not just what we're charging for tickets or what we're charging for popcorn. I think it's collectively we all want to see this be strong. And I want you to know from my seat, we talk about that a lot and try to be sensitive to making sure we generate the revenue so we can be competitive, because it does take resources, it does take revenue, and I know we're going to talk about it, but we're about ready to have a $24 million line item added to our budget because of the rev share as part of the settlement if it gets finalized in the House litigation. Money's got to come from somewhere,
right.
And I think fans understand me. Sometimes the media, no offense to you, often say, well, they got the money. They've never sat down and looked at our P&L.
Right.
And understand that, hey, to have 21 teams, one team makes a healthy profit, football, one turns a profit, men's basketball, and we have 19 of them that lose into 7 figures on an annual basis. And so trying to support that and support them in a manner that we're expected to and we want to takes a lot of money, and it's not just, we've talked a lot about it with the arena and such. as much as I wish there was just a secret vault with $300 million sitting in there, we literally don't have that.
Right.
And so we have a fiduciary responsibility, but we are very sensitive to the fans and the pricing there.
I'm not one of those media people, by the way. I understand. I remember sitting in your office. You said, "Look at that tree out there. Is that like a money tree to you?"
Yeah.
And I remember you said, and I understand. With that in mind, when you look at the future, is there a possibility that, and I know you don't want to do this, but as an AD, that at some point you might have to look at discontinuing sports?
Right.
I know that's not the goal,
Right.
but could that become a harsh reality?
I'm surprised it's not getting talked about more by schools. Coach Saban and I were at a bipartisan roundtable with Senator Cruz a little over a year ago, and I said in my comments that day, with senators from multiple states in there, a lot of media, and I said I'm concerned about the Olympic model because college athletics supports the United States Olympic movement, and it's like 82% of the athletes in Tokyo were current or former NCAA athletes. And Senator Cruz put me on the spot. He said, "Well, what sports are you talking about?" I said, "I'm worried about swimming. I'm worried about track. I'm worried about soccer. All those sports that cost us a lot of money, that's great experiences for the young men and young women. We're at Alabama. People look at us and think we have more money than the Vatican, right? And we're having to make very challenging economic decisions. And what I've told our coaches, I've told our staff, I've told Dr. Bell, our president, and our trustees, I've said, I want us to make decisions that put us in the right position for 10 years from now. I hope I get to be the AD for a lot longer at Alabama. I'm 53 years old, but I want whoever the next AD after me to say, yeah, Greg and his team, they make good decisions to put Alabama athletics in a good position, not only for a year or two. And so, as part of the settlement, scholarship limits are going away. Now you can have roster limits, and that's going to be implemented. But I've seen a couple schools who have nowhere near the same financial position that we do, who are maxing out some sports and scholarships that they're already losing $3, $4, $5 million a year on, and I'm like, what are you doing? And so, what I am saying is our goal is not to do that at Alabama, but I don't know how schools aren't looking at that, who are having some really challenging decisions to make.
Greg, in 30 seconds, can you tell me what the future of the bowl games is? I know Marshall couldn't even play in the bowl game this year. And we may expand the playoff even more. Are bowl games still going to be here in 5 years?
I don't know. When you have kids continue to opt out, the bowl game traditions have been wonderful. I mean, you know, in the South, you got to go to the Sugar Bowl, right? In the SEC every year. What a cool thing that was. Unfortunately, that's been diminished. And so I'm proud of our kids on our team that I think a good majority of them are going to play this year. But you've seen a de-emphasis of that, and that's not good for the health of the bowl system.
NIL, portal, revenue sharing, that's all coming up in our final segment. All right, welcome back to our sports special with Greg Byrne, Alabama Director of Athletics. All right, let's get to NIL and the portal and revenue sharing, settlement, all that stuff. It's almost like overnight we were in a 55-mile-per-hour speed zone, and I want to say it went to 90 miles per hour, but really there's no speed limit. And I hope I'm not being too dramatic here, but it just appears to a lot of people that everybody's just riding this thing out going 100 miles an hour until it just crashes.
Right.
Will that happen, or will there be something put in place prior to that happening?
Well, we're hopeful with the House settlement that there is an opportunity. Part of what is in the settlement right now, and I think has to be in there for it to settle, is that you can enforce your rules.
Right.
Now there will be the new revenue sharing, and part of the rules would be saying whatever NIL opportunities a young man or young woman has to have fair market value to it. I'm getting the percentages not exact, but basically in the NFL, NBA, WNBA, Major League Baseball, those type of sports, it's like 30-some% of their athletes have marketing deals, name, image, and likeness deals. While in college, it's through the roof on that because of recruiting. All right, and so there is, and I'm part of the group that's working on the enforcement side. And the goal is to try to get something in there that can be legally supported to have fair market value be part of that. If that is the case, that could help give us some guidelines of fair business practices that could help young men and young women, but also put our budgets in a position to where we can keep broad-based programming across the board Because I said this, I mentioned Senator Cruz's bipartisan roundtable. We want to have broad-based programming. We want to have that. It's so good. Those young men and young women work their tail off just like kids on the football team or basketball teams do. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that can help, and then I hope that could put some type of package together at the federal level and say this gives us a working model that is sustainable for the long haul. I've told our Yale, Alabama folks, and we still need people to support Yale, Alabama. That's an important part of what we're doing. I've told our folks who lead that, though, they better not write a check they can't cash. And so far, you have, and a knock on wood here, but you have not seen a lot of crazy NIL stories out of Alabama. And that's purposeful, and we've tried to be very thoughtful of the locker room, the entire team, where it's just not one or two kids. And I think that's good overall for the long-term health of the program and what you're doing.
It sounds like to me that you don't want to see players actually become employees, that you would like to avoid that.
Yeah, I think people talk about that.
Yeah.
So the revenue that we generate right now, 35% of it from a rev share standpoint is going to go to Uncle Sam.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
We all have to pay our taxes. We have a
right.
responsibility to do that. However, that's money that will be taken away from investing in Olympic sports, from investing in a number of kids that you have participating. And so I would hope we can find something that does not require them to be employees. We're also a right-to-work state, right?
That's right.
And so unionization in right-to-work states is a really challenging thing. So I'm not an advocate for it. I'm hoping we can find a model that will allow us to have college athletics with a lot of kids participating and have an opportunity from a male and female side to go have kids go out and wearing the script A and compete for the University of Alabama.
All right. Are you working on changing the timeline? We've got the portal. We've got signing day. We've got college football playoff and bowl game, and it's all just overlapping. It just seems ridiculous to me.
It is. Yeah, I mean, the fact that you've seen young men who are playing in the playoff go in the transfer portal. And I can tell you, when we were some of our playoff teams, we had agents trying to tell kids to not play in the playoffs before, so it doesn't shock me. But it's like, man, this is the one opportunity you have, maybe the only opportunity you ever have to be a part of this, and you're choosing not to participate. That's not good. But one of the things I talk to kids about is, agents have a vested interest. They try to get their client as much money as they possibly can so they can get a cut of that, right? And some of the NIL agents are asking 20, 25%, even I've heard of some of 30%. And that's not right. Most sports agents are around 3, 4, 5%, and they're in the cuts they get from coaches' contracts and things like that. They don't care about the University of Alabama. Our coaches, our staff, we genuinely care about the University of Alabama, and we genuinely care about the young men and young women. And we're really, I can tell, I'm really happy for the opportunities that so many of our kids. I saw Bryce up there on the screen earlier. It's awesome that Bryce was able to capitalize on him winning the Heisman Trophy and the stage that he had at Alabama. We are. Look at our TV numbers. Back to the TV question. We have millions and millions and millions of people watching our football games, and often our men's basketball games, and some of our, softball gets some good numbers sometimes to watch the games. You have a stage here you don't have anywhere else for legitimate NIL, and I think that should be capitalized on. Let that market drive itself,
right,
but not just a straight, pay-for-play booster payments that we've seen.
Greg, I knew we were going to run out of time. 30 seconds. Can you I know we've devalued education, whether we like it or not, the perception is. But my last question, 5 years ago to now, it looks completely different. Will it look completely different in 5 years than it does now?
I think we're still going to be under pretty major evolution for the next few years. And my hope is that what the evolution allows us eventually to get is to a landing spot where education is valued. Because our kids still do value education. I do want to say that. But what NIL has done and the transfer portal has created disruption to the educational model.
Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Good night.
Roll Tide.